As the bandits closed in and made threats, my mother and I helplessly hugged each other. But just as we were about to lose our cool, I heard the familiar sound of a car engine. Hello everyone, I'm Tiara. If you want to hear more about my story, please hit the like and subscribe buttons to support me. Thank you guys. I was born into a family that can be considered quite special because my mother is also my father. All I know is that when he discovered my mother was carrying me, the man who was meant to be my father vanished. For many years, my mother and I have been dependent on one another. In addition, my mother gave me excellent advice about men. This story happened on a very ordinary day. That day, I was studying at a cafe as usual when a man in a suit approached and started talking to me.
Excuse me, gorgeous. Can I ask permission to share the same table with you?
I noticed that the cafe was very crowded today, so I reluctantly agreed to let him sit with me. It's okay, feel free.
I'm Jack. It's a pleasure. And how can I call you?
I'm Tiara.
Thank you very much for letting me sit here with you. With this position, I can admire two beauties at the same time.
And what are those?
It's the sky out there and your beauty.
Even though my mother taught me from a young age that men are an extremely dangerous species, that afternoon, Jack and I actually had a very pleasant conversation. I didn't think a man in his 30s could be so funny and pleasant. That night, I told my mom what happened. My mother told me about the old days when she first met the man who was considered my father. After hearing that tale, I came to the realization that, despite the fact that I have a part of me that yearns for love and happiness, my mother and I have had a wonderful existence for a very long time. When there were no men living with us, we had numerous challenges, but my mother and I overcame them all. I am even capable of doing my own plumbing repairs. I refuse to allow fleeting feelings to undermine the harmony we have spent so much time and effort establishing. Somehow, Jack knew where I studied and where I lived. I constantly see him waiting in front of my house every morning or in front of my school gate every afternoon when I leave school with his shiny sports car. All the students at school were extremely amazed and excited to see such a car. But I completely did not care about it and turned a blind eye to his existence, as all my hunches showed. That this is not okay at all. I spoke with my mother about this a lot. When Jack came to my home in his fancy sports car, my mother spotted him too. Because of our poor financial situation, my mother and I had to work a lot harder just to make ends meet. But it was this challenging yet contented existence that taught me that happiness isn't truly derived from wealth. In addition, my mother and I think that if I work hard every day, things will be different in the future. Whether at work or school, I have to be quite independent, so I strive to live up to my life's slogan, be number one or be nothing. One night after my mother and I returned from going shopping at the supermarket, we encountered a very unexpected event. That night, our road home was unusually deserted. At a turn, a group of people wearing black shirts and veils approached. My mother and I were extremely scared when they approached. They were robbers and wanted to rob us of all our money. I tried to swing my bag to fight back, but until one of them pulled out a knife, I was completely defenseless. My mother and I hugged each other helplessly as the robbers approached and threatened. But at that moment of panic, I heard a very familiar car engine sound. And then the car's lights flashed. After that, I saw that it was Jack's car, followed by a large black car quickly approaching. Jack and several bodyguards quickly got out of the car and rushed over. Very quickly, all the robbers were controlled by Jack's professional bodyguards. Jack came forward to help me and my mother, then very kindly asked,
Tiara, are you okay?
"Thank you, Jack. It could be worse without you." Thanks to Jack's timely appearance, my mother and I were safe from the robbers that day. After all, not all men were as bad as the one who abandoned me and my mother, so I decided to officially start getting to know Jack. After that day, Jack, as usual, was always present at my school gate every day after I finished school to pick me up, always with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. He took me out to have dinner at the most luxurious restaurants in the city and bought me many expensive gifts that I had only dared to see online and dream about before. Jack has brought me a life I have never experienced before. However, in complete contrast to my happiness and enjoyment, my mother had an extremely bad premonition about what happened. One night, she told me her thoughts.
Tiara, I have a bad feeling about Jack.
Although I was a bit upset when I heard my mother's words, I could not ignore the opinion of the person who had worked so hard to raise me alone for all those years. What's wrong, Mom?
Have you ever wondered why Jack appeared at the right time that night? He even brought a bodyguard. This can't be a coincidence.
You're overthinking, Mom. Jack always brings a bodyguard with him when he goes out. Moreover, since the day he started courting me, he has always quietly followed me.
Don't you think that's very wrong, Tiara?
I used to feel very annoying, but now Jack treats me so kind. He's really a good man, Mom. I think you are just too tired from work today. Please take a rest. After trying to convince me to believe in her hunch but failing, my mother didn't say anything and quietly went back to her room. Everything a few days later happened very normally. Jack said that he dispatched 2 bodyguards to constantly watch over my mother and me because he was concerned for our safety. In addition, Jack always sends a bodyguard to take me wherever I go when he can't spend time with me because of work. But that night, my mother told me something that made me almost completely collapse.
Tiara, I want to show you something.
My mother told me about how she secretly followed 2 bodyguards in front of our door and overheard this conversation.
Why are we always the victims because of the boss's philandering habits? I can't remember how many times we had to follow some girl to stage a heroic rescue scene.
Haha, Gary, why so serious? After all, he pays us quite well.
Frank, money isn't everything. You should also know that the boss has quite a few fraudulent actions in his business. You should think, is it safe for us to accept those coins?
Shh, Gary, why are you saying those things here?
I wish this was all a dream after hearing the conversation, but alas, it was a painful reality. I helplessly hugged my mother and cried. But then that pain turned into anger, and I was determined to make Jack pay for what he had done. After that day, I pretended to be fully subjugated by Jack because I realized that in order to have a chance of collecting the evidence I wanted, I had to go inside his house. Jack was ecstatic because he didn't know that the roles of predator and prey had been switched around. He had invited me to dinner several times, but I was certain that if I went there unprepared, he would definitely get what he wanted, which was my body. So I pretended I was sick, and he had no choice but to take me home. But once I have carefully prepared, I am ready to enter his lair to make him pay for all the things he has done. I changed into my nicest and sexiest clothes that night and went inside the tiger's lair. We ate dinner in his private room, and I secretly added an anesthetic to his glass of wine when he got up to give the chef orders outside the door. I held my glass up proactively when Jack came back, and he drank it all without holding back. Then he unfastened the collar and gave me a longing look. The man who flirted with me so sweetly no longer resembles him at all. He got up and started to come toward me, but stumbled, fell to the ground, and passed out. I dashed to his computer and was horrified by what I saw inside. He had a ton of photos and videos of all the girls he had conquered, along with a huge amount of paperwork about his tax fraud. I made a quick backup copy of everything on a USB drive and rushed out. When I got down to the house, I was stopped by a bodyguard, but I had already anticipated it, so I calmed down and told the bodyguard. The boss wants you to buy him a pack of cigarettes. He's resting in his room and doesn't want to be disturbed if you haven't bought him a pack of cigarettes yet.
Yes, I will go now.
Thanks to that, I safely escaped from Jack's mansion and returned home. My mother and I took the evidence I'd collected immediately to the police station, and very quickly Jack had to pay for his crimes. From now on, he will no longer be able to harm anyone, and my mother and I will return to our simple and happy lives. I realized that as long as I have my mother by my side, I will always be safe and happy.